Alright, so we're going to talk about the anatomy of plant just a little bit today and how it relates to hybridizing. So right here, this is your calyx. And then here is your pedicel. That is a stalk that connects to a node. And your leaf has a petiole that attaches to the node as well. And then you have what's called an internode. That's the space in between one node and the next. That's an internode, and that would be the node. So when you're hybridizing, you're wanting to come in here and you want to pull these petals off. This is called emasculation. So when you're pulling the petals off, you're removing the source of pollen, which you're going to see an anther. That's that dark piece at the end. If it's ripe, it'll release little pollen granules. Those are the gametes, or the sexually reproductive male part of the plant. You rub those between your fingers, you see that there's no white or dust left on your fingers, and you know that there are no ripe bits of pollen grain on there. So we're going to go ahead and just talk about what connects those anthers to the base of that calyx. And that long piece, if we can see it, probably not, but that little piece is called the filament. The filament and the anther combined is it's called the stamen. It's the whole piece. And then when you're looking over here at the female portion of the flower, or the receptive piece, the end where you put your pollen is going to be called your stigma. That's the receptive portion, or at least you hope it's receptive to the pollen that you're putting on there. Then you're looking at the back piece over here. That's your ovary. The ovary is the part that develops into a jalapeno or a poblano or whatever it is. And in between the ovary and that end piece over here, so ovary, stigma, in between that you have what's called a style. So that's the part where you put your pollen on there. This is male gametes. Those gametes germinate and then they grow down that style. So they grow down that style and then they meet what's called the ovules, or the female gametes, and then they combine with those, creating individual little seedlings that I equate to being like little children. So if you're a mom and you have your right belly or ovary, you know, that large stomach, then inside of that would be your seeds or your children that grow. And each one of those could be different if there's different pollens applied to the flower. And that's multiple pollen donors are definitely a possibility, especially if you're leaving the flower complete and intact. But as this one is already completely emasculated, it's going back in the greenhouse, this will be safe from pollination because insects will not want to pollinate it. So what we're going to do, I'm going to mark this with tomorrow's date, so I know that it needs to be pollinated tomorrow, but it was emasculated on the 7th. So tomorrow I know that I'll come back, if I can find this, I'll mark it. And sometimes I will double mark them if I've got a good marker. But all of that's important because just like all of your children are different, each one of those seeds are going to be different. None of them are identical. Even if you self it, it's not technically, you know, clones of each other, which is why you want to pick the best ones to select your seeds from. Nothing that we're doing this way is cloning. It's all reproductive mixing of either the parent plant's genetics, which is still a shuffling of cards, so to speak, or the chromosomes. If you would look at those as cards, there's always a shuffling that goes on, even if it's a selfing that's occurring. And then when you're talking about the pollen, if you're using it from a different source, that's a lot of times referred to as the parental generation. So let's say if I put a poblano pollen on here, that would be the parental parent, or the P1, P2, doesn't really matter how you want to term it, but that's going to be your parental generation always. And we can thank Gregor Mendel for that. He developed, or at least taught a lot about the P1, P2, the parental generations when he was doing his crosses. And when those gametes get together and they create that seed, that little baby seed, that is your F1 seed inside of the parental plant that you're utilizing to make that cross. Very simple stuff. It gets complicated. So remember, this is your pedicel. That's important. That's going to connect, and if you lose sight of that, then you may lose sight of your cross. If you lose your leaf, which is attached via the petiole to the node that I like to mark that connects with the flower itself. Those are different marking systems that help you to keep track of your cross. Otherwise, you're going to sit there and you're not going to know what you're doing, what kind of cross you're making, and it's just going to be, are you really going to want to put the time and effort, and do you know where that cross is going? No, you don't. And that's the thing with a lot of these crosses that are out there, that people guess at the crosses. They have no idea what really was put into it, because they're finding these open pollinated crosses, and then they're like, oh, it's an off pheno. Well, they don't really know if it's an off pheno, if it's a cross pollination, whatever. They don't know, because they just don't. This 100% I can tell you will be whatever I put on there. So you can basically count on that and wave your hand over the flower and say, these are not the flowers you're looking for, bees. They're not going to come after this. And again, it's also in the greenhouse, further protected, and it's winter. So many different forms of isolation there. And today is the 7th of February, and we will come back on the 8th of February to follow up with that. Thank you so much for your time.